Thank you all for joining us today as we explore a day in the life of an AI translator. The Polaron team would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians throughout Australia and their continued connection to land, sea, and the community. I'd like to start with the agenda. We will firstly introduce our panelists and hear from Polaron's founder before moving to our case study, panel discussion, and finally finishing off with a Q&A. Just a reminder that we will answer all your questions and comments during the Q&A section at the end of this webinar. First off, I would like to introduce Dr. Shani Tobias. She is the director of the Master of Interpreting and Translation Studies at Monash University, and is also NATI certified as Japanese English translator. Next up, I would like to introduce Byung-hyun An. Byung-hyun is a project manager within the Language Services team here at Polaron and has coordinated projects using machine translations. Welcome, Byung-hyun. I would also like to introduce Gabriela Lefebvre. Gabriela is the managing director of GL Translations and it's a Spanish translator. She has also worked alongside Byung-hyun on machine translation projects. Welcome, Gabriela. And I would like to give a warm welcome to Eva Hussain, the founder and director of Polaron Language Services. Eva is a certified translator, interpreter, and a NATI examiner. Now, Eva, can you tell me a bit more about Polaron?
I can, and thank you for that warm introduction, Carla. So most people that are part of this webinar probably know who we are, but we are celebrating our 23rd year of existence this year in November. So I don't know what happened with the time or where it's gone. We mainly focus on translation services, do some interpreting and lots of engagement services. And look, we have been using machine translation one way or another for many, many years now. Maybe not in the way that people understand it, but certainly machine-assisted translations have been around for a long time. So I'm very excited to be able to talk about this today in a bit more detail.
Thank you very much, Eva. And now we are moving on to our case study with Byung-hyun An.
Hi, I'm Byung-hyun, and I'm going to talk about machine translation today. Next slide, please. So what is machine translation? It's called MT as well. It is using artificial intelligence, AI, to take a main role as a translator instead of human. It is not to be confused with CAT, which stands for computer assisted translation, where human is the main translator and computer is only serving as a tool for human translator, just like hammer for carpenter. Next, please. So when we do machine translations, we follow the following process. We select the source language and target language, and the machine translation generates the translation, and we often do a post-editing process with the human translator. You could add another layer of second human translator, but usually only one human translator gets involved in the MT process. Next, please. So what are the advantages? Speed and volume. For example, if you have a large volume of text that you would like to translate into multiple languages, and you only have short amount of time, machine translation could be a good option for you because it could translate multiple languages in an instance almost, regardless of text amount. It is also cost effective because only one human translator gets involved in the process, where usually it's more than 2 or more people gets involved in the traditional human translation. And machine translations could also provide a good starting point for the human translator, but it only depends on the text type or style and such. Next, please. What are the disadvantages? So you cannot guarantee the quality of the machine translation. That's why we have a human post editor afterwards. It could be a major issue for technical translations, such as legal or medical fields. It also has limited use. It can be only used for digital format. For example, if you have something to translate on a printed document, you would need to digitalize them first in order to use machine translation, which could be very time consuming, and you might even end up with even more costs doing with the human translators. Also, not all languages are supported by machine translators. Rare languages like Dinka or Aboriginal languages, they're not in the list. So it is impossible to do machine translations for them at the moment. And machine translation often struggles to convey cultural aspects and slight nuances that exist in the source text to the translation. It gets often omitted, or machine translations usually sticks to the word for word method, which is not always ideal for every translation. Next slide, please. So in summary, machine translations are great in terms of speed and amount, but it cannot guarantee quality of it. Also, AI generated content can be offensive to readers. You might have an experience where you saw a translation that assumes and you assume that is a machine translation, and you do not want to read them any further. It is because it often has ambiguous meanings in the sentence and grammatical errors, which makes the reader hard to understand the translation, and it does not consider cultural sensitivity most of the time. For example, when you have a source text for, let's say, aged care industry, and the target audience is elderly people, and machine translation would most likely to omit, would not consider tone or register of the translation, and might just use a plain tone without honorifics, and that could be an issue for some cultures. It could be quite offensive to some cultures. And I would suggest to use machine translation for internal use, where you don't have to worry about the above issues. For example, short emails, meeting summaries. When you need to send those over to the overseas branch, then it could be a good option. Next slide, please. So there's a new AI called ChatGPT. ChatGPT is one of the language learning model that they are trained on massive amounts of text data. When they generate an answer, they base on their previously input data, choose words that are most likely to appear next. And ChatGPT's their answers are very natural. If you ask ChatGPT to do translation, the target language sounds very natural, unlike the traditional MT. It is also capable of understanding human instructions. For example, you could give them a set of context or instructions. If you would like to have some word translated into particular word, then you can ask that before asking to do a translation. So it kind of looked like an evolved version of the traditional machine translation. Next slide, please. But why we do not use ChatGPT as a translator? First, language learning models such as ChatGPT, they are not born as a translator. They now build translation in mind. Their answers choose words based on frequency. The way it operates is quite different from typical MT, because typical MT would try to have word translated with the equivalent. They will try to find the equivalent word in the target language, but ChatGPT is just considering what would like to appear next. What is most likely to appear next, as if it was it was written in a target language. They are trained to always provide an answer, even if it doesn't make sense. So there's an issue called hallucinations, where ChatGPT produces outputs that are not real, totally false information, but it puts in such a convincing way So you would believe it unless you do the thorough outside research, and you would need to check every sentence ChatGPT generates. This is quite concerning for, it's a serious issue as a translator, because you could not, if you could not believe the outcome of the translation, it can't be used for translation, right? So, and it's also highly variable. If you ask ChatGPT to translate one sentence today, and then the answer that ChatGPT generate will be different if you ask something tomorrow. So you wouldn't have consistency in their translation. And I witnessed an instance where I saw a demo. They gave ChatGPT set of instructions, translate this word into that, and please type this into mine. They gave the context, but there were instances where ChatGPT ignored or did not follow the instructions and still translate as it liked to. And I think this is some serious issue with consistency, which is not ideal as a translator. Next slide, please. So yeah, ChatGPT, I think, is going through the hot Gartner hype cycle, which is the graph on the right side. So when a new technology like this being introduced to the public, we have this high expectations to that technology, what we can do about it and what we can do with it. But then we soon to realize that harsh reality of issues such as hallucinations, not being consistent, it does not follow instructions sometimes, and we would soon meet the common point where we see its practical use. And I don't think this will completely wipe out the flip up the current translation industry. So I'd like to conclude my presentation with the question, answering the question, would human translators eventually be replaced by machine translators? No, I don't think so. But there might be a shift in a human translator's role in a translation industry. The role of a human translator might experience some change as a proofreader or editing rather than as initial translators. However, there's still a huge demand for human translation. Most of our projects are done by human translators. I think in an optimistic view, I think the translation industry, this might be an opportunity to grow, because more people would have access to translations. They will be more interested in translations, and this industry might get even bigger. Depends on how accessible it is. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Byung-hyun. That was excellent, very helpful, very informative. And now we're moving on to the panel discussion. So over to you, Eva.
Thanks, Carla. And look, we're going to be tapping into the knowledge of a couple of really amazing people that I have known for probably more than 20 years. So we are going to talk to a practitioner, so Gabby, and also to an academic who has been working both as a practitioner and at a university for quite some time. So I might start with you, Shani. How have things changed since you? Firstly, how long have you been around in this industry? Probably longer than me, I would think. And how are things changing at university as you're producing new graduates in light of artificial intelligence?
Thanks, Eva, and thanks for having me today. Certainly, I have been around for a long time here at Monash University, teaching translation since around 2006 or so. And yes, there have been huge changes in the industry and the technology that translators use in that time. And so I guess my interest at the moment is helping to prepare students for their potential roles. As Byung-hyun mentioned, the roles of translators are changing and are going to be changing rapidly as new technology becomes more prominent and is used more widely. So I'm interested in thinking about, how to prepare students for this and how to encourage students to be proactive in considering what kinds of career options may be available to them. In terms of that, I guess some of the things that I've been thinking about is what some of these roles might be. So I think that, as Byung-Hun mentioned, the quality of AI translation tools is certainly getting better, such that it is machine translation, as we know, has been used for a number of decades. And neural machine translation in particular has been around for roughly 7 or 8 years. And models, these large language models such as ChatGPT are really just accelerating this trend towards increased automation in the language services industry. So in this context, I guess translators need to be trained and need to be prepared to work alongside these kinds of tools because they will be doing less of their own interlingual translation work and instead moving towards working with neural machine translation with generative AI tools to, as Byung said as well, to do things like review and validate translations or post-edit multilingual content generated directly from the algorithms. So, being able to understand how that process works and how to assure quality for their clients is really important. But also, as Byung also mentioned about the growth of the industry, content creators themselves, authors themselves, are using this technology more and more, like the generative AI technology, to help them create large volumes of content. And whether it's marketers or whether it's technical writers, there's so much, they're using AI co-pilots and so on in such a way nowadays that there's an increase in content volume, which potentially means that more needs to be translated, and there's more interest in multilingual translation from some of these organizations and businesses. So because of that, I think there's going to be an increased demand for people with language skills and translation skills who need to be able to work in a kind of a workflow together with AI. In that sense, I guess the platforms for authoring and the translation management systems as well will need to be closely integrated. So I think that students and new translators starting out really need to think about how to use AI translation tools critically. So understanding their benefits and their efficiency gains and their usefulness to them in drafting translations, but also the disadvantages in terms of quality concerns that Byung-Hun mentioned too, when it's okay to use them and when it's not okay to use them, and to be able to advise clients, to give clients expert advice on this aspect of their translation strategy. When is the optimal, when is it optimal to use AI, and in what combination with AI and human translation as well. So I think thinking about that in terms of how to prepare students and new translators is really important, and also the role that they might have in developing this technology or testing and evaluating this new technology is something else that they should consider. But I think that one of the things that I'm trying to do with my students as much as possible is to help them answer this question, what can human translators do that machines or AI can't? And the first one really is about being an intercultural mediator. I think that's really important. Client organizations need people with an empathetic human understanding of both the source and the target cultural context. And as we've heard, AI doesn't have this, so it can't really effectively bridge the differences between cultures. So, for example, you might have a community translation project where important messaging needs to be communicated to diverse multicultural communities. We can certainly see from the COVID-19 experience in Australia that one size fits all approach doesn't work with community translation, and it's the best practice is to co-design content together with multicultural communities to cater for their specific culturally based needs. And we know that AI can't do this, so this is a huge role for translators to act as an intercultural mediator, and also as a trans creator. So this is a word that's often used in recent years about content that requires creativity, attention to nuance, the tailoring of the message. multimodal content where text and images interact. Only human translators and mediators can make judgment about the appropriateness of this kind of content and the cultural symbolism of colored speech, for instance, or particular images that might need to be adapted into semiotic translation. So, for example, maybe it's more effective to translate a written text into an audio file for the particular target audience because the particular demographic may have, low literacy or something like that. So I think that's another aspect we can really emphasize about the changing roles of the translator or the trans creator. And also the ethical dimension, because translators know their code of ethics. They can ensure confidentiality, privacy, data security. We know that there's issues with AI in that regard, and also AI bias, stereotyping, and non-inclusive language. Only a translator with that understanding can actively avoid bias and reinforcing those kinds of stereotypes. So the ethical dimension is really important. Clients need to be able to trust that their translations are of a certain quality, and they can only trust a human, really. So that aspect too, and then the fact that sometimes the translators need to be experts in a particular subject matter if there's a requirement for certain types of legal or medical translation, and those are also instances where you don't want to rely on AI to ensure that level of subject matter expertise and quality. So I think there's a lot of scope for different roles that translators can adopt in this new environment.
And we're going to speak to a practitioner in a moment, but just to tease out a couple of themes and things that you mentioned there, Shani. One thing is confidentiality. Whatever you put in a search engine, they actually own it. People don't realize that. But I've also read an article about how when they were producing ChatGPT, how they cleansed the data. So all of that was outsourced to a country in Africa where people were making $200 a month and being exposed to really confronting images or messages where they still use humans to make sure that it makes sense. So if you peek behind the scenes a little bit, you might see unethical practice or things that aren't as exciting as they sound. Because for me, given that I've been a translator for some time, I'm surprised that people don't want to translate. It's just like, why do people not want to write anymore? For me, it's like I'm so passionate about creating words and communication. But I think one thing that we are seeing in the new cohort of interpreters and translators is that they have to learn about this technology, as you mentioned, and use it as a support rather than a replacement, right? Is that fair to summarize it that way?
Exactly. It's a very useful tool, and it's inevitable that industry is going to want to increase their use of AI, and it has huge benefits from that kind of perspective of scalability and cost effectiveness. And just making information more accessible in large-scale multilingual projects. And so there's certainly a lot of scope for improving the quality, but it's going to happen. It is improving all the time with machine learning, and even for, I guess there's more scope for improvement in some of those low resource languages, like Fiona mentioned. It's not so good, and there's the challenge of sort of the ethical issue of certain languages are dominating in this regard, and there's minority languages which are completely excluded in the process.
And of course, languages are dying every day, and I think English is quite an aggressive language in that regard, where all this technology is in English. Like there's not really much happening outside of it, and we look at machine translation through the lens of an English speaker a lot, or the system that we create. Gabby, how has life changed for you? I know you've been around for quite some, I don't want to say decades, but years. Have you had to, if you wanted to turn your camera on, have you had to adapt, and what sort of things are you seeing as a practitioner?
Well, I think that, yes, Eva, many years. Don't say how many.
Can I get you to turn your camera on though?
It doesn't let me.
Okay, that's okay. Well, tell us.
There we go. Give me 1 second.
Here you are. Beautiful.
Oh, okay. But well, I will tell you that I have been using CAT tools for more than 25 years. So that is, it is a change anyway. But what can I tell you is like it's easy to keep glossaries or to translate things. We can be consistent regarding terminology, similar text. Therefore, we can save time that we'll be spending at different stages of the project, where artificial intelligence may not be able to. So it's been a change, and it's been changing lately. I would say in the last probably 2 years, I would say 2 years, that machine translation has been like a thing. And yes, and more clients are requesting that.
Okay. And your particular language pairs, which are Gabby, Spanish and English, I think the synergy between English and Spanish are, they're linguistically quite close, let's put it that way. And perhaps the quality of what you're seeing is not too bad, but there are still all these biases and all these mistakes and introduced issues of, garbage in, garbage out that you're probably seeing, right? So it's not as simple as you receive a machine translated text and therefore just lightly edit it. It's a lot more than that. Yes, some translators even say that it takes them longer to edit machine translation than do it from scratch. Yeah, how are you finding that?
Yes, that is a big challenge because, yes, let's say that you can have the bulk of the translation, that's fine. But still, you need to do some research. You need to check that what the machine translation has done, it's correct, because sometimes you are translating a topic. There are some words, probably specific terminology, and you have to look for that. And yes, it's easier sometimes to use or to translate from scratch instead of using those tools. So that is challenging. That is something very challenging. Although Spanish is spoken in many, many countries, and probably the tools are more accurate, but still there are sometimes that it's easier to translate from scratch instead of reading or editing what the translation or the machine translation has done.
Particularly if it's something for publishing or something that needs to speak to our hearts, not just our heads, when it's a marketing text or something that we want people to make decisions around and all of that. But Gabby, I wanted to ask you, this is a bit of an elephant in the room, but it also puts a lot of pressure on pricing, right? And business and how we know it. What's happening in that space? Tell us.
Yes, well, that is a big challenge, I would say, Eva, because sometimes you receive translations and the clients say, okay, it has been done by a machine translation, or sometimes they say, no, it has been done by a professional translator. And when you look at the document, it's like, no, I don't think so. But you agreed on the price, and sometimes you cannot change it. And what happens is that in general, they try to offer less money for what you are translating, but then you have to consider that translation is just the first step. Then you have the proofreading, right? And then the proofreading text goes again to the translator. Then it goes to the community checker. And then, so there are some processes that still you need to do for less amount of money, let's say.
Yes.
But in a way, you can also take more work because you are translating faster. So I think that we should find a balance probably between the translation from scratch and the translation with this type of tools. But yes, it's been an important thing. Right?
Yes. And I think there's a there's a difference between, translation that's used for, I don't know, basic communication. If you're dating someone, no problems. Go on Google Translate and have a conversation in whatever language. But when you're making decisions, particularly legal decisions, I've seen things like just recently a video of a recipe of a cake. And it was so clearly machine translation, but pretty accurate, except for one thing, where instead of lime, the fruit, it translated into Polish lime, the chemical. So you think, haha, funny, but imagine if somebody put lime instead of the fruit into the cake, and what kind of issues there could be. So you still need that human interaction and intervention even to make sure that the information that's going out to the community, and Shani mentioned COVID, if you're going to be making legal, medical, or any other decisions, it's important to have that human input. But Gabby, would you say that artificial intelligence is good or bad for the translation industry? Like, or are you sitting on the fence?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. And I think there's still a great area for us to uncover or deal with. And there is no doubt that artificial intelligence has been around us for many years now, and that it has been applied in many, many industries, not only the translation industry. So as translators, we need to adjust to the fact that whether we like it or not, we must take this on board. Yes. So in a way, artificial intelligence helps us to work faster because we are able to translate more words in less time. But we also need to consider that we won't need to type so much. And after a few years of working, it's like your hands start to cause problems, right?
What's it called? Repetitive strain injury, right? Yeah.
Yes. So in that way, well, yes. But for instance, what we were saying is like artificial intelligence cannot fully grasp the nuances or complexities of the language. So yeah, the challenge also what we were discussing is like train the clients in a way also. Well, we always try to educate the clients, but this is something new that we have to tell them. When they come with a translation that says a professional translator or no. It may speed up the process of, I don't know, probably 70% of the translation, but still you need to put a lot of hours into a translation. And also what I think that is not helping the translation industry is what we've been discussing about rates and cutting down costs. I don't think it's helping in that way, but we can, I think that we can reach to an agreement, let's say, among the translators and the industry. And yes.
I agree. I think definitely artificial intelligence here to stay. The thing is that being ethical means that we need to be transparent about what happens. If you are going to use machine translation, I think the clients need to know. The clients need to know where the data and content is stored, where it's been. Is it done in Australia? Is it done by a professional translator? All of that. Shani, how about you? Do you think, and I think I can guess what you're going to say, is AI good or bad for the translation industry?
Well, I sort of have the same opinion as Gabby just was mentioning. I think it's inevitable, and I think there are certainly huge benefits from a sort of industry-wide perspective in terms of the efficiency gains and the volume of information that can be translated and can be made accessible to people who don't speak, the certain language that's the main language of the particular organization or business that's trying to communicate. But I think that as I mentioned before, we have to be mindful that translational flows of, usually from the center to the periphery. So you can think about what that means for the dominance of certain languages and cultures over others. And the fact that, minority languages, as we talked about, may be left out. And there's various challenges that the industry still needs to overcome with regard to their use of AI. And like Gabby mentioned, we need to educate clients about, when it is appropriate and when it's not. Also make sure that the translators who are going to be using AI know that too. So the clients and the translators, and how to work with it efficiently, and be mindful about when it's not appropriate and when there's cultural nuances or creative aspects that need to be dealt with and conveyed in a way that's appropriate for the target audience, using their skills as intercultural mediators and trans creators, and understanding the ethics in using AI and the questions that are raised and the biases, but always being mindful that while you can use AI as a tool, and while the industry will continue to and it will become better, there's going to be some aspects in the process that will always require the human expertise to ensure accuracy, to tailor the content, to deal with legal ramifications. But maybe the advances in AI, it's going at such a rate that this conversation may indeed look quite different in a few years' time. And at the moment, I think we're kind of learning on our feet a little bit. And so I think it's just great that we can keep the conversation going and kind of be proactive and responding to the developments as an industry and as translators and trainers, and also participate in shaping some of the developments as well.
I heard someone just recently say that AI is as disastrous for human race as global warming or environmental issues. So I don't know. I'm also sitting on the fence, and I like when things work and when you can communicate better. But I think, as you said, education's key. As long as the process is transparent and we use this for good, not for evil, I think we're going to be good. But you're also right. I think that the technology is progressing faster than we can keep up with it, maybe. And as an educator, I guess there's a little bit of disconnect when you put somebody through a course like a master's degree at Monash, they come out and already technology has moved on. So this is a little bit like that as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's about also just explaining to students that this is the case and that they're going to need to be adaptable when they finish their degree and they start out in the workforce. It's not like it used to be with translators and how they worked. It's a completely different process, and it's going to keep changing, and just preparing them for that. And these days, I think this is the case, and not just in our industry, in all industries. So students currently, young students, they're coming into universities and they're understanding this, and they're trying to develop their skills in a way that they can be more adaptable and flexible, and just understand what the ramifications are of AI for the world in the future, which we don't really know yet.
Yeah, it's interesting also in the context of the fact that I've just been seeing everybody advertising for interpreters and translators. I have never seen this volume of interest from different institutions and translation companies. So there's something happening where we've got this technology, but we're not able to use it for good for humans. Like, we still need that human input. Carla, thanks for turning your camera on. We do have only a couple of minutes till we're done, and we have a lot of questions and a lot of interest. We had like 320 people registered for this webinar, so it's amazing.
I know.
We're not going to be able to answer all the questions in the world, but maybe a couple. Go, Carla.
Yeah, so the first question is AI advanced enough and appropriate to be used at this time in interpreting?
Oh. Shani, do you know anything about interpreting and AI?
Not a lot. I know that it's been a lot of advances in speech to text and text to speech technology, so that it is becoming possible to do automatic speech translation, and it can be useful in certain circumstances with some of the products available, like if you can think of customer support and things like that. But it certainly wouldn't replace at the moment a professional interpreter.
No,
lots of
not
roles
yet.
Involved. But in the future, these kind of use cases may expand, I'd say, but I'm not an expert in this area.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you look at automatic captions on platforms like LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook, they're full of mistakes still, very funny mistakes. And I've seen people speaking language other than English, and the AI trying to understand what they're saying in English, even though they're speaking like Ukrainian or Japanese. So there's still a long way to go, but we have to watch that space, Carla, and whoever's asked the question.
Yes, thank you so much. And what are the ethics around using AI in translations?
Oh, that's a question for another very, very long webinar, Shani, yeah?
Yeah, that is a question. It's a big question. But there's the confidentiality and data security issues are the main ones that come up because, as we were saying, if you put a text, confidential text into an automatic translator, machine translator, ChatGPT, whatever, that information is no longer confidential. So those are a big that's a big ethical issue. But also the issues to do with bias that we mentioned as well, because there is AI bias, like, for example, because it's based on the data that's there, it can reinforce stereotypes. It can not be inclusive in terms of like gendered language and so on. So yeah, you probably noticed that if you experiment with it for a while, and so those sorts of ethical issues exist too. Yeah.
I think there are lots of others, and there are quite a few interesting articles out there about translation and ethics. And maybe that would be another interesting topic to cover next time when we meet. Carla, we probably have time for another quick question, maybe two.
Yes, another question is, should we feel threatened by AI?
No, you know, I'm not an early adopter of anything. And I remember when the mobile phones started getting cameras in it, I thought, who the hell is going to use a camera in a phone? What for? Like, don't you have cameras? So don't ask me about the future of what's going to happen. But I think technology will develop anyway. And I think both Gabby and Shani and Byung-Hun already mentioned that we need to kind of learn which bits of it to take out of it, how to do it ethically, and where technology can support humans in achieving better outcomes. But some of the stuff I've seen is a bit scary. What do you think, Gabby? Should we feel threatened or embrace it?
Well, in a way, I think that we have to embrace it anyway. Anyway, but we still have to work a lot on how to apply these tools to the translation industry. I cannot say anything about interpreting because it's not my area at the moment, but no, I don't think that we should be threatened, but we have to be alert perhaps to see what's going on and what or the way that artificial intelligence will help us. We try to have the tools to help us, and then we'll see.
It's about staying
I may change
agile.
my mind. I don't know.
We'll have to catch up and in a couple of years and see where things are at. But the other interesting thing I think is that some people think that translators sit there and type on typewriters. So like the image of translator and what we do hasn't quite caught up with all the technology that's happening and we use in everyday lives.
Yes, but well, in a way, you have to know how to type.
That's right. That's right. Or maybe use voice, to progress that. Any other questions that are urgent, Carla, or are we done?
Yeah, I think we are done. There are a couple of other questions, but we can discuss internally and then send the answers to the registrants, to the attendees. And with that note, thank you so much to everyone. It's been excellent webinar, very informative. And if you have any language services related inquiries, please contact me at carla.f@polaron.com.au. Be sure to follow our socials on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube for more Polaron
I think it's maybe internet. So I'm going to take over by saying a big thank you to Gabby, to Shani, to Bill.
Thank you, Eva.
And Carla for coming to this discussion. As always, we run out of time. There's so many other things we always want to cover, but we will take you up on the offer, Shani, to catch up in a couple of years and see if we still have a job. I think we will. It's about how all of it integrates. And thanks to great educators such as yourself, great practitioners such as Gabby, great project managers such as Byung-Hung, we will, I think, have jobs for years to come.